Hi, I'm Lorraine Watry, and this is my watercolor YouTube channel. And I have worked with watercolor for about 29 years now, and I teach workshops and classes. And I actually have an online class coming up in October. We'll be doing glass. So if you're interested in that, you can look on my website. And for today, I am going to be working on finishing up a water lily painting that I was working on with a student, and I hope you find the process interesting, and I'll explain kind of my steps and how I would work through finishing up this water lily painting. So I'll flip my camera around, I'll flip my camera around, and I will see you in a few seconds. So as you can see, we were working on a water lily, and we got lots of the petals started, and we had started putting on more layers, and then we got in mostly first passes on some of these water lily pads, but then we did get shadow started as well. So we were in process, and so now I'm going to finish this up and get to share this with all of you as well. So this water lily was an image that the student brought with them, so I'm not going to share my drawing or the photo, but I will kind of walk through the process. So the first thing that I want to do is I have out 4 colors. I have cobalt, my quin rose, I have hands of light, which is like lemon yellow, and then I have new gamboge. And we were using kind of a mix of the yellows depending on where we were painting. I do have a first coat back here on this petal, but it's maybe just a little pale. I'm actually going to go on the inside because the petal here is leaning over. It's got a curve to it. And so I'm going to paint the inside of that petal first, just so I can judge if I want to darken this outside edge. So I am doing a mix between New Gamboge and my Hands of Light. And then I'm actually also going to make a purple. And I want my purple to be more on the red side. And just for kind of contextual information, when we started the lily, I'm making a muted yellow, by the way. So I want this, I'm using the purple to kind of mute that yellow and make it not as vibrant. When we started the lily, we started by placing a base coat on the different petals, and when we would paint one, if it was wet, we would move somewhere that we could paint the next petal without touching that damp watercolor. So we wanted to paint individual petals as we moved around. And I always paint generally in the beginning, a little bit cautiously maybe, or slowly. I am working up my values and also kind of figuring out where everything is and looking at edges and seeing if something has a hard edge or a soft edge. And I don't want to go too dark too quickly because with watercolor you can lift color back off, but I would prefer to take my time in the beginning to just kind of make a base for putting all of the rest of the color on later. And it gives me an idea where the different parts of the petals are, and then how dark they will eventually be. All right, so this, let's see, I've painted there and there. This one is not touching, so I can go here. This petal right here actually needs a little more pink at the bottom, but it's got a purpley sort of neutral that we used over in here. And yellows can be a little hard to shadow. In this case, it is a neutral mix, so I'm going to make that with the yellow and the purple. So when you mix complementary colors, you will get a more neutral mix. And neutral can look brown, it can look gray, it can be the color you're using, but in a more muted, not as vibrant look to it. And so I want this shadow to be pretty dark. It does have a little bit of a reflection over here on the right, so I'm leaving that side alone for right now. And then as I'm coming down, I can tell that it's going a little more on the pink side. And I didn't clean my brush, so there is still some of that neutral mix in my brush. But then as I'm coming down this petal, I'm going to keep adding a little more of the rose. And at some point, toward the bottom, I will clean my brush right quick before that's dry. And now I'm picking up clean rose, and I've got nice vibrant color on my brush. And so that's a way that you can gradate or slowly change. Some people would say ombre, maybe go from a neutral mix up in here to a more vibrant mix down below. Okay, now before this is completely dry on that side, and I could wait till it dries, I could still come back to it and soften this edge later. It is, the paper is very kind of flat looking right now, so it doesn't have any shiny look to it, but there was still just enough time where it hadn't quite dried that I could soften that edge. And I'm going to leave this edge over here harder. All right, and let's see where I want to go next. I think I'll go back to this petal because I know that one's not touching anything that I just did. And it does have some, it has a little bit of an edge, again, that is folded in. And it has a little bit of shadow color. Oh, that's a little pink. So I'll pick up a little more cobalt on this side. And this shadow is hard-edged there, and then it does sort of fade and go pinker. So I just went and dried my brush, or washed my brush a little bit, and then picked up some of the rose. And then it feels like down on this left side that it does go a little more purple again. And really, as long as my values are working, if my shadow color is not exactly what the petal is showing me, as long as the values are working, then it should read well, it should look good. Okay, so I've got a darker value in there. I've got some lighter shapes around that value. And all right, let's go. I think I'll go back here. There's a petal right back in here that I can add some more of the base color before I put in the darkest shadow. And I want just a touch more yellow on the top part of this petal. So it's a very thin glaze. There's not a lot of paint or value on my brush right now. It's just light. So same thing here. And then I'm going to go in and pick up, I dried my brush pretty good because I don't want a lot of water on it for this. And there is a little bit of a highlighted edge on this upper right side. The brushes I use are Silver Black Velvet brand, and it's rubbed off, so it's not really viewable anymore, but this is a number 12, and they have really nice points. So that's what I look for when I'm looking for my what brushes I want, because I want to be able to use the brush and put a lot of color on. It also is, because it's a blend, it will hold a lot of water and pigment. It's a mix between synthetic and natural hair, and so that is the other thing that I look for with my brushes. That's probably still a little too wet. I don't think there's anything around there, so I'm going to go into this one. And for this one, I am putting a little bit, actually I need to clean that edge a little bit. It's got paint that came over. So sometimes I will have edges that are a little rough. You can use your round brush or you can use a flat brush. And so the flat brush, I can just go back and forth and clean up this edge before I paint in there. And that way, anything that has come over the edge where I didn't want it, I can just come back and clean it off. Depending on your pigment, some pigments are staining, and so a flat brush like this one that is a softer bristle may not lift staining pigment as well as it does these. I do have staining pigments on my palette and I use them, and it really just depends on the painting and the colors I want. And then I do have a stiffer bristle, and this is sort of just like a craft brush or an acrylic or oil brush, and it has stiffer bristles. And so if you're trying to lift something and you can't quite get it to move, having a stiffer bristled brush works well. And I don't care for the actual scrubber brushes that are out there because I think they are too stiff and they can really mar your paper. I'm giving that one a little chance to dry so I don't accidentally have something go over the edge, so I thought I'd go back here. Okay, so I did put water on the paper first because this one has kind of softer edges. It doesn't feel like there's a hard-edged shadow in here, and so using the water I can keep those edges soft and blurry. Okay. And now I'm going to go to this one down here, and I'm going to place water on this lower left because it feels like there's a little bit of some bounce back light, or maybe it's got a glow through there. And then I'm going into my muted grayish or muted shadow color. And this shadow is kind of hard to figure out on this one. There's some lighter edges, feels like there's some pink in parts of it. So I've kind of made sort of a random shape there. I'm going to go pick up some pink, go right in here. And it's going to be muted still because I've got that other color or colors on my brush. And I'm going to clean my brush right quick. And just make sure I have a little water in this lower section, and then put a little more pink in here. I feel like the shadow on this upper edge right here needs to go a touch darker. It's not quite as dark as I'm seeing. It's got a very definite kind of edge right there, and maybe right in here as well. Okay, so when you're working with a shape, as long as that shape still has a little bit of shine to it, you can come back into it, but you need to be careful that your brush is not a lot wetter, so the paint you're putting on doesn't have a lot of water in it, or that you don't have a lot of water on your brush. And that's usually where people run into trouble because they can cause blooms and things, just not realizing how wet the brush or the paper is or isn't. All right, so I started with a little bit of yellow at the top of this petal and then added some rose into that because it looks a little peachy almost. And then I cleaned my brush because I want to come into the pure Quin Rose and bring that down. It's dry enough. Now normally when I'm painting, I don't necessarily use a blow dryer unless I can't paint in some other area. So if I can move around my painting, then I will ignore the blow dryer. But if I get to a point where I'm only have to work in that one area, or I really want to get something done in an area, then I may pull out the dryer. And there's nothing wrong necessarily with a blow dryer. The one thing I would caution for a blow dryer is that if you dry your paper too quickly, I have noticed, and I think I've heard this from others as well, that it kind of deadens or flattens the look of the pigment because it doesn't give time for the pigment to sort of settle into the fibers of your paper, and it might even possibly lighten it. I don't know. I thought I read somewhere that's what someone noticed, but I'm not sure if that's accurate. Okay, so I am still going around with these on these petals, and I'm just sort of building them, getting on darker values and figuring out the color as well. Okay, I'll go into this one because it's not touching anything, and some of these will definitely get some shadow, and that this is just, again, getting another layer in there. Okay, whoops, that's a little dark. So if you put color on and it just feels a little too strong, don't panic. So I will go back here in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and pull this down. And then I'm taking my brush with some water on it, and I'm just coming over here to the left, and I can soften that out. There wasn't a hard edge yet. There will be a shadow on here that has a hard edge. So I was able to adjust that. Okay, and then let's see. Can't do that yet. I'm going to come down here. I think that's dry. If your paper feels cool to the touch, then it's not dry. It needs longer to dry. So it should feel just kind of room temperature when it's dry. All right, so I'm going to place, without putting any water on my paper, I'm going to place shadow where I'm seeing it, and then part of some of the edges will get softened because they are softer in the image, and it is nice in watercolor to have hard and soft edges. It kind of can lend a feeling of watercolor for one, but also can make the image more interesting and possibly more realistic as well. So right up on this edge it is softer, and then this back edge is harder edge. Maybe right down here it softens a little bit, so just a little water to sort of pull at that edge. And then I do see a tiny bit of pink on this lower left. So I'm placing some water, but I'm not going to touch the shadow that I just put on there. And I'm just going to add a little pink. Now, no one's, other than the student and I, are going to see this photo that we're using, but it can, those little touches can add in a shape interest that someone may not realize that they're seeing a change of color, but it just gives a little more what a lot of people call eye candy. It's just, there's a little more rather than just straight yellow there, and so it can make it more interesting. Now this is mostly a hard edge shadow. It may change and I may soften parts of it, but And there is a little bit of a light edge on the upper part. And then there's a shadow that comes next to the petal I just did, but I'm going to leave that alone for now. This petal also has an outer edge where it's curled the opposite direction from some of these other petals. So I am going to, I feel tongue-tied tonight. I'm going to come up here and make the edge, and then I actually need a little water right in here to let that blur down, and then it's the very edge that is just slightly darker. So I'm trying, whoops, wow, actually hit the edge would be good. I'm working at a weird angle here. Okay, there we go. I'm trying to just catch that edge and let the lighter part be on the lower section of that. And that'll help give it some form and make it feel like it's lit as well. Okay, can't work in there. I'm going to go to this yellow petal right here. And it has, there's actually two pieces. There's a petal right here that's pointed, and then behind it is another petal. And so I'm going to go to the one behind and put a little bit of that muted color. And this shadow that's on this one, there is some of that pale yellow peeking through in parts, and there's a little bit of texture to it, so I'm leaving just a little bit of lighter value peeking out. I think I'll go to this one. So this was one that I had placed some color on earlier, and now I'm going to come back and I'm going to put the shadow on there. So this is now the third coat that I'll be doing. Okay, so, and this does have a hard edge on the left, kind of goes around that lighter petal. And then there is a little bit of a glow from yellow, maybe yellow into pink. It's either, it could be a vein or it could just be the way the light is catching it, but there's a little bit of a glowing line kind of happening in there. So I'm going to leave that because, again, that's one of those things that can make it interesting for the viewer to see. And it might not be something that they notice when they are farther back, but when they come up close, they might notice that. I'm going to get a little more yellow in my mix and maybe just dab my brush on my towel. Oh, by the way, these gray towels are flour sack towels, and they start white, but then as I use them over time, they get stained, and they still work. I throw them in the wash and wash them with everything else, and it takes out some of the paint that's in there, but yeah, they do get stained. But I really like them. They work, I feel they work better than regular towels or throwaway towels. Okay, so looking at this shadow right here, it's not quite as dark as the photo is showing me. So I'm going to go into that shadow one more time and make sure things around it are dry. Okay. And so as you can see, sometimes it's back and forth. So you get some color on, you maybe get some color on in other places, and then you have to look at your image and see if something needs to be adjusted. So again, I put the color on the dry paper, and now I'm going to use my water to soften that edge and let it be a little blurry on that side over there. Okay, so that's better. And I think I'm going to go, I need to go over in here. I'll go to this one right here, and it is yellower at the top. And I do have a little bit of pink on my paper, but there is a little bit of yellow in this one up there. And there is an edge that again is folded over. And then as it comes down, it does go pink again. So I'll just leave the yellow on my brush, go pick up some of that pink. So it'll be a little bit of a mix right in here. And then it does go brighter pinks, so I'll clean my brush. And I have to do this pretty quick because the color that's sitting on my paper is starting to dry. And I want the edge between that brighter color and the peachier color to be just blended and not, I don't want to see a line. So I need to move with a little bit of speed. And that's the other thing to think about with watercolor is that there are times if you're working on something that you should not stop because you need to make sure that you get through the shape or make sure you get your color on before you start having issues with lines or things like that, or drying edges. And then, yeah, just it is a process of at times making sure you're moving quickly. Okay, so I decided for this petal right here that I was just working on, I was seeing more pink in there than what I was currently seeing, so I came back in with a little bit of pink at the bottom. And I did bring a touch of it upward into the petal and then just softened with some water. I think I'm going to go down to this one. So this is a dark petal. It's like this one right here, and it needs... I think I'll leave that lighter value for this highlight because there's a highlight right on that edge. And I do need to get out more rows. And I will probably be using a little bit of my cobalt in here. I'm going to start sort of away from that center because I want to put some water in there before anything dries. Now I could have put the water there first, but I got going and then realized that I wanted water there. And now, because it's a little bit of a highlighted, kind of glowing in that center, that's why I wanted the water in there. And this one has a outside edge that is in the green to rusty green look, and that's the outside of some of these petals on the water lily. As they're growing in bloom stage, they will be sort of closed up, and those petals that open first have that kind of greenish and on the olive to rusty color in them. Okay, so I've got that started. Now this is wet enough that I don't want to put anything else in there right now. It is very shiny. Let me see if I can show you. See how that's really shiny on my paper? Oh, and by the way, my board is tipped. So I have my board up on a block. It's about 2 inches off of the table. And I do that because that helps me control how the paint is moving, and it kind of keeps gravity moving it downward on my page. And I'm going to go in and pick up just a touch of color. So I dried my brush really well, and I'm hoping to get just a little bit of a lighter value right in there. There actually is just a little bit here as well, but I don't think that's going to stay because everything, as I said, gravity is moving it downward. I could kind of keep messing with it. And I do see a little bit of green right in this bend right there. So I'm going to take my cobalt and my new gamboge and make an olivey color and maybe a touch of the rose in it. So it's going to mute it even more. And then I dried, you may not have seen that, I dried the back of my brush. So I have color in the tip, but I'm taking water out of the brush so that I'm not going to be putting really wet color down on the paper. And I actually need more color because it doesn't have a lot. A little more color right in there. All right, and then I'm going to leave that alone. So later on, if I decide that it either needs more value or where I'm seeing it would be maybe right in here and possibly a little bit right over here that is a little more purpley or darker value, and I could come back and do that later. And I won't worry about this light edge for right now because I can't do that right now. Okay, this is dry, so I need a little more color on this petal. It's not quite got enough oomph to it. So I'm going to come in with a second layer, and it won't be that dark, but it will help. And I will put water on the paper first. And I need to get out some new gamboge. A little bit of color and just a touch of the rose. Hopefully this is still damp enough. Actually, I'm seeing a little more pink than peach on this. And there will be a very dark shadow right in here where I'm working that I'll have to come back and put on later. Let's see. I need to come right up to that edge, and I was not quite catching it. Okay. So I'm going to go, I'll go to this back one over here on the right. And there is one in front of it, but I'm going to ignore that for now, and I'll go to this one. And the inside of that petal is mostly pink at the top. I did put maybe a tiny bit of the new gamboge that was sitting near my pink in there. I don't think I want it this dark though. One of the things to think about is if you have water on your paper to start, if you're going to do wet on wet, then that water is going to add or create make the paint look lighter when it dries, because you are adding water to the mix. So for this, I started on dry paper, so my color was just a touch dark up there, and I came back and used a little water on top of it to lighten it before I came down to the lower part. So as you can see, I work with the water in watercolor in multiple ways. I'm going to, oh, and I mentioned the class that I'll be doing online in October. If you're watching this video a lot later, that class is October of 2023. So it is a 3-day workshop, and we will be painting an object of glass. I haven't figured out my demo piece or image yet, but for those classes I do I demonstrate, and then I give you guys some time to paint, and I do answer questions. I provide the image and the where am I going here? Sorry. I provide the image and the instructions on how to get set up to be ready to paint. Some people like to just come and watch, and then they paint later on their own when they can, so they can just kind of focus and watch what I'm doing. And then also the video of each of the days of the class I provide to the students, and it doesn't expire, so you can take your time and go back and watch as long as you want. Okay. All right. So now that one's a little darker. So it's starting to have a little more form, and that's what I'm trying to do with the values that I'm putting on here. So I'm not just kind of willy-nilly. Okay, that was a really silly thing to say. I'm not just going around and randomly placing color. I'm trying to start to give depth and some dimension to the lily, and using the photo as my guide, I can create, hopefully, the look of a three-dimensional object on two-dimensional surface. Okay. I think I want to give a little more, trying to decide which. This is my Hansa medium with a little bit of Quinn Rose, and I'm going to use that on the stamen. So water lilies have really interesting stamen. They almost look plastic. They're very kind of thick, and most of them are yellow. I think there's probably some that are a lighter color, but yeah, they're very interesting. The centers are. Okay. The other thing that I would suggest that you do every now and then when you're working on your painting is get back from it. So if you've been looking at it the same way for a while, it can really help to stand back from the painting every now and then. And I will also carry my paintings around with me, so while I'm doing other things, and then every now and then I'll glance at it, and sometimes those just kind of almost side glances are a great way, not sometimes, a lot of the time, they're a great way to see if I need to adjust something in the painting. I'm just kind of getting that one started, but it will need more in a few seconds. I do see, before I go away from it though, I can put in a little bit more pink right there. Maybe a little up in here. Okay, so I haven't touched this yet tonight. Over here, this petal has a area that is turned up on the edge, and I have it too light. I'm also going into the shadow, so while I'm painting that edge, I'm going to darken that shadow a little bit. And then on the outside, near the point of this petal, it actually goes kind of rusty color. So that's, again, probably one of those outside petals. So I am going to go get out my burnt sienna, and I can use my Quinn Rose. I'll see if it's strong enough. I may pull out Quinn Magenta if this is not quite what I want. It might work. I'll use it, I'll start with it, but then I may probably use it for this upper edge. Then I may add I will add some cobalt on the lower edge. So I'm just, without cleaning my brush again, going into the cobalt. So now I've got the burnt sienna, the Quinn Rose, and a little bit of cobalt on my brush. And that gives me that darker edge, and because that area was still damp, I just saw a light value there. It is sort of merging and moving up into the rusty color a little bit, which is fine because that gives it a little bit of form to that shape. And now I'm just using my damp brush to sort of pull that pigment out to the right. There is also some of that rusty color in here, but because I don't want to cause a problem with this edge, I'm going to wait. That is dry, or almost dry. So I'm going to go back into that petal again, and I'm going to pull out more Quinn Rose. And this time I will remember to put some clear water right in here. So I know I want to add a little more, just a touch more rose in a couple places. And then I'm going to go pick up some of the cobalt. And I don't want so much cobalt that it looks blue. I need more of the rose on my brush than the cobalt. Actually, I need a little more overall. Wasn't quite dark enough. And then I know I want some over here as well, right along that edge. I cleaned my brush because I wanted to go back into just the rose. And then this light shape that I left there, that's probably going to end up being too light, but for now I'll leave it and then I can come back if I need to. So right here, this petal that is, I actually have a water lily growing in a container in my yard, and I have to overwinter it in my garage and everything, but it is very similar to this water lily, so I don't know if it's the same, but they do have kind of a yellow, pale yellow, and then they go down into the pinks, and I can tell that this is not quite as vibrant as I would like and doesn't have enough, it's not dark enough. I'm trying to decide. I may go ahead and put just a touch of water in the upper edge, and now I have to be careful because I've got too many colors over here. So I don't want to overdo the shadow, but I want to darken a little of it where I feel like it's a touch darker right along there. And then I'll go switch to just the rose because I've already got a little bit of muted color under this. And that way it'll create a little more vibrant color down here, and I'm going to pull a little bit of that up into this shadow area. Okay, and then I need to go soften that edge again. So this edge right here, use a little clear water. I have 2 containers of water sitting next to me, so whenever I'm painting, I use the dirty water sits closest to me, and then I have a container with clean water next to that. And that way, if I need just clear water, I can just go get it, and I don't have to worry about having it possibly put some color on my paper. All right, I'm going to go back to this one. I haven't done anything back here, and I have the Hands of Light. I need some new gamboge out. If you start getting a really messy area on your palette and you can't figure out what colors you've got, it's better just to go and clean it off and start again. And I am not so concerned that I have to have, especially for something like this, have to have my colors be exact or match exactly. There is variety in nature, and so if I have some variety in my petals or in the colors here and there, it's it just adds interest to it. Now there are times where I don't want that. I actually just decided that I wanted to put a little more yellow in some of these as well as I was talking. But in general, I am not concerned about necessarily getting the exact color every time. But also it can help, the more you mix colors, the more you work with your pigments, the more comfortable you get with what they mix and how to make a certain color. And it is helpful to have someone say, oh, if you use this color and this color together, you'll get a nice mix. But sometimes it's just about experimenting and painting. The more you paint, the more time you have behind the brush, the easier it will be to find colors that you like and also find mixes that work well. Okay, so this edge right here on this left side, we had put in this warm shadow on this one, and I had left a hard edge on mine on that left, and I'm not seeing that shape necessarily, so I wanted to adjust the edge. So I softened it a little bit, and then I'm going to see if I can come up, clean this up just a touch so there's a little more shadow up into there. That's a little closer to what I'm seeing. That petal needs to be a little yellower, but for now I'll leave it. And this is not dark enough. Oops, I dripped, I think. Oh, no, I was working in there. Okay. So it's getting there. One of the things to think about with flowers is where they go down into the center. Oftentimes that's where you're going to see the darker values. So like right down in here on this petal, I'm going to darken that again. It's maybe the third coat that I have on there, or I've had 3 on there, so this would be a 4th coat. And just coming back in with a little more pigment. And that darker value will help it feel like it's got a little more shadow down toward the middle of the flower. I can do that one finally. Okay, let me get out more rose and maybe just a touch of cobalt in there. And then, as long as I don't put my hand into anything, right here, the shadow is coming near this petal, and then it comes down on the inside, right in here. And then I'm going to go pick up even more pigment. So very little water and a lot of pigment on my brush. You might be able to tell by the change of my clothes that this is a different day, and I ended up having to finish the water lily on a separate day, and the video ended up being almost 3 hours. So I am splitting this into either 2 or 3 videos, and I will continue showing the finish of the video or the water lily in those other videos. So I hope you enjoy seeing the series, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.